It's time for us to look at our major conversation for today, looking at the influence and the kind of cooperation, the economic ties ongoing between BRICS nations. It's just an economic bloc that started in 2006 with 4 nations: Brazil, India, Russia, China. And now in the year 2010, South Africa also joined the economic bloc, adding to the acronym S, and that's why you have it to be BRICS. But the question is, what kind of influence is this economic bloc bringing to nations, especially Africa? And now that there's advocacy for Nigeria to join the economic bloc, how is this going to play out? These are things that our guest analysts will help us to resolve and provide a better perspective as regards this development. We're being joined by our in-house analysts. We have Sam Orovwuje here with us this morning.
Good morning, Femi. My pleasure to be here.
Join us.
Good morning.
Good morning, Blessing. Thank you.
All right. So we're starting on a global scale, looking at the development and the kind of economic ties and cooperation, ongoing between the BRICS nations. It's the acronym from the word BRICS, the acronym for the first letter of the founding members of this economic bloc. You have Brazil, Russia, India, China, and in 2010 you have South Africa. Well, let's provide a background to this so that our viewers will understand why the influence of this group is becoming crucial at this time. Talk about the purpose, the essence of having this kind of economic bloc, and the kind of influence it's bringing on a global scale to economic issues.
Thank you very much. You already laid some background, but in 2006, where BRIC, not BRICS, was formed in Russia, you had just Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Then in 2010, South Africa joined. So first, the major imperative for that bloc was to improve originally on foreign investment flow among those countries that constitutionalized the BRICS. Then South Africa was invited specifically by China to join in 2010. But as we speak, in terms of size and geopolitical and economic stature of that bloc has increased. With effect from January 1, 2024, we had countries like Egypt, Iran, United Arab Emirates, and some other country have joined that bloc. So they are growing in power in terms of geopolitical influence and power. They are growing in economic stability in terms of the relationship that exists. They actually form a bank called the New Development Bank, where they are trying to float a currency that these new other countries will benefit from. So it's a challenge for the G7, for the G20, and other geopolitical considerations at the global stage. But I think beyond economics, there are equally power issues, geopolitical power issues, that they are trying to see how far they can stabilize other power blocks within the international system.
All right, this challenge that seems to be targeting the dollar from the BRICS nation, when Europe came together and created a single currency for Europe, it wasn't necessarily about the dollar, but this move by the BRICS to create a single currency, to increase their number and to strengthen trade amongst them, targeting the dollar. What do you owe it against?
I think within international politics, international economic relation, nations are sovereign nations, so they have the power to make decisions that will impact on the economic interests of their respective countries. So I don't think there's anything wrong in trying to see how people can form geopolitical and economic bloc to better the lives of their citizens. So if the focus is on trying to see the dominance of the United States of America and the West in terms of trade relationship. And certain blocs are trying to provide an alternative platform in terms of international trade. I think, in my view, is a welcome development, because American dominance and influence since the Second World War has affected a lot of relationships. So if they are able to put a common currency that will improve on their trade relationship, I think there's nothing wrong in that.
All right. Let's look at what may likely play out, because the target is looking at to weighing down the influence of the Western authority and see how this bloc could provide alternatives. How do you see that playing out in coming months, that you'll be having more members joining the bloc? Do you see that influence as something that should be of interest to the U.S. or to the Western authorities? And how will this impact Africa if this economic bloc becomes something, a force to reckon with, especially for Africa?
It's already a force to reckon with. I think within that space, you have Ethiopia, you have Egypt already there. So if let's even look at it from the population dynamics of those countries that make up the BRICS. Then we'll look at their GDP and look at their standing. Look at, let's take Brazil. Brazil has over 200-something million people. The population is far greater than the population of Nigeria. Talk about Russia.
Russia, China.
Talk about China, 1.3 billion. Talk about India, 1.2 billion. Then you come to Egypt, 50-something. Come to Ethiopia, 100-something million. So by the time you put those population together, you know that it's a force to be reckoned with. So, but the way that we shape cannot be speculated now, but with the growing influence of China, I think America really is really afraid, in quote now, of China. And China is trying to see I can rally around with Russia to put more people into that bloc. And I think they are very resolved in terms to see how they can get a parallel financial instrument that people can use to trade within the international system to run concurrently with the dollar. I see that's where the politics is.
Let's look at the feasibility of another currency running concurrently with the dollar for international trade. How feasible is that, being that for almost every international trade that you have to do, it has to be based on the dollar?
It's very feasible. You know, at the formation of the United Nations after the Second World War, America and the other great power play a major role, and the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, these worlds, were brought into being for development purposes to make a quick recovery from the damage from the Second World War. To that extent, that has been a dominant currency in international trade. But international politics is very dynamic, and nations are constantly aligning and realigning in terms of what they do, to the extent that that alignment will bring about new changes in the international system. And there's a great resolve among the international players to see how they can reform the other institutions, so that the other America doesn't even hold everybody to ransom. So it's feasible. If a bloc just started with about 5 countries, and within the last, say, 14 years, you have about 6 or 7 other countries. Argentina was supposed to be among those ones that was supposed to join in 2024, but for the internal political dynamics, they pull out around November last year. But talks are ongoing that more countries will come into that bloc.
Now, let's look critically what will be the impact of this for Africa, because it's also good to situate it well. Now, these are emerging markets who somehow, they are developing countries whose influence, economic influence, cannot be pushed aside. Now, but for Africa, what will be the impact of this for the African continent? And then looking at the membership, do you see more African countries coming on board, especially the giant of Africa, which is Nigeria?
Well, I cannot speculate whether Nigeria will eventually join, but the rate at which that bloc is growing, and if you look at the two major power broker within that zone, I'm not too sure if more countries in Africa will join, maybe within the next 1 year. After the last summit they had last year, they had these new people. Look at Iran. Let's even come to Africa. Egypt and Ethiopia are already there. Look at UAE, with just about 9-point-something million people. They are in that block. So if you look at the major masquerades there, China, Russia, and possibly India. And if you look at the volume of trade between India, China, and possibly Brazil with Nigeria, quickly I think there's a likelihood that we'll be within that block, and it will be beneficial. Look at the two major elements there. There's geopolitical alliance, there's economic alliance, there's a need for trade and investment. So, and these are the major drivers of international politics or international economic relations, which are critical to any nation survival.
All right, now for the countries that recently joined, how strategic are they to strengthening the BRIC nation, the BRIC bloc? I'm talking about the African countries that recently joined, Ethiopia, Egypt.
No, it's strategic because if you look at the founding philosophy of BRICS, was to improve foreign direct investment. After that, they extended it to improve on trading relationship among the member states. Therefore, even for belonging to that bloc, is already strategic for investment purposes, for trade relationships. So the volume of trade between those countries has even improved over time, and it will continue to improve because new members are coming. So new alignment in terms of trading with these countries will improve their relationship eventually.
But do you see a kind of reciprocity from the U.S. Discontinuing trade or relations with some of these countries?
Well, in my personal view, I don't think U.S. actually possess that moral standing to see how he wants to pull out. What is really the relationship? If you look at the volume of trade and relationship between Africa and even China in the last 10 years, it has quadrupled the relationship between the United States of America, and that cause for worry. And even American politics, they were trying to influence the African Development Bank some 2 years ago because of this trade relationship. So I don't see any issues that if America pull from Africa, then we'll have problems. Relationship that exists with these other blocks will sustain us, in my personal view.
Looking at the growing influence of this bloc, do you think this should be of concern to the Western authorities? And what kind of diplomacy will you expect from the Western authority? What kind of approach, what kind of disposition will you expect looking at this bloc becoming a force to reckon with?
The West in particular and the United States of America has been working to see that this BRICS group does not get to the level to which it will get. So that opposition will always be there. So diplomacy will continue to play out in the way they do business. Mind you, some of these countries that we just spoke about are equally players at the level of G7, at the level of G20. So I think it's diplomacy that will continue to be the major currency of relationship in the international system. So, but I do know for sure that America is worried about the dominance of China in African trade in particular.
All right, so now that the Scotiabank says that the US dollar is set to fall in 2024, and they made this forecast due to the strengthening of the BRICS alliance and ongoing global inflation trends, is there anything the US can do about this projection?
The Scottish bank, a Canadian bank that does a lot of research in terms of trade and investment, based on their research finding, they're thinking that the trade will deepen to a very large extent, but those forecasts are essentially based on the countries that have just joined from January 1. You look at the volume of trade between Ethiopia and India, you look at the volume of trade between Egypt, Brazil, China, Russia, and all that. So that, to a very large extent, will weaken the influence of America in international trade. And there's no gainsaying that that will negatively impact on them over a period of time. So America will be worried, but to what extent can they stop those relationships need to be seen in the nearest future. But I'm sure that American influence in world trade will gradually decline.
Now let's look at what is the need for, or what is playing out with Nigeria. Officially, Nigeria has not shown interest in being a member of this bloc. There are prominent Nigerians, a good reference is Femi Falana and the likes of them, who are advocating for Nigeria to join the bloc, to break the dominance of dollars. And you know that economy, the Nigerian economy is, is import driven, and so the sensitivity of that currency will always influence our economy. Now, how do you see this playing out? Do you see Nigeria coming forth with this interest soonest, knowing fully well that our president is also occupying a sensitive role as the chairman of ECOWAS, how possible it is, and if this is going to happen, what will be in it for Nigeria? How sensitive is the role that Nigeria will play in this bloc, knowing fully well that you have South Africa? There's this rivalry, this economic rivalry between Nigeria and South Africa. Somehow you have South Africa being at a point the largest economy in Africa, then now Nigeria. So there's always that rivalry. How do you see this playing out for Nigeria, now that we've not officially stated we're becoming a member?
I think let's look at the issues from two perspectives. American will find a way to reduce the membership of that, but that cannot be sustained. On the other hand, if you look at our relationship between China in the last 20 years or so, the volume of concession loan or development loan that has come from China to Nigeria is much compared to whatever we got from the United States of America. And if that is anything to go by, and the influence of China in terms of our development effort, I'm sure over time, China will try to see how they can persuade Nigeria based on the existing relationship. But in my view, I don't think there's any really critical rivalry between Nigeria and South Africa in terms of who is dominant in the African politics. But I think too, if you look at the trade relationship between Nigeria and South Africa, there are lots of investment, South African investment, core investment in Nigeria. And I'm sure that, like they say, is a permanent interest among this nation. And at the end of the day, those are what we speak. But in terms of political engineering, I'm sure Russia and India in particular will persuade Nigeria to join, because if you look at the volume of trade between those countries, it's enormous. And I'm sure interest will be uppermost in the decision making eventually.
But why do you think the Nigerian government is not being proactive about, just like South Africa, being a member of the bloc?
No, you cannot say being proactive. The point is that...
see it as a power.
No. There are power indices that you must look at when you make some decisions. So there may be some people to people or government to government diplomatic relationship that they need to look at over a period of time and find a way to realign with the other person. So those countries that made decision to join will have done all their political calculations. So Nigerian may have certain things on the table, so we don't have the information, so we can't speak to it. For example, Argentina made a proposal to join last year with the former president. When the election did not work, a new president came, and the guy wrote a letter to them that, as we speak, based on their political calculation, they will not want to join from January 2024. But they are still ongoing conversation. So they look at all the political calculations, economic calculation, and the diplomatic relationship that exists over the years. So they look at those alignments, what is critical, what is important, what is the long-term view of the decision-making process if we make a decision to join the BRICS nation. But in no distant time, I'm sure that will be brought to the table.
So this courting of Africa by the BRICS and even the US, what benefits does it give Africa? What advantage is it to Africa?
It's essentially...
How can it be used?
Okay. The best relationship here beyond the West, even though the US was not involved in colonization of Africa, but if you look at the West essentially, based on the colonial relationship, in my view, they've not really done well. But countries like Russia, India, and China possibly, what they have done, it may not be the best compared to what the West has done, but China in terms of concession loan that has come into the country in the last 20 to 25 years, vis-a-vis what the colonial master did from independence of most African countries till now, I think this new bride, so to speak, is doing better, in my view, and I think African countries will benefit more, particularly from the position of China, rather than giving aids. They bring concession loans that are tied to development, so that you can see what the level of the impact is still questionable. But I think as the relationship improves, it will be more strategic and that will benefit. Well, then African leaders, when they go to the table too, they should bring something big to discuss so that they can get a bigger benefit. But it's a win-win situation in my view.
Knowing fully well that even the West, has likely criticized this bloc, that there is no unity of purpose. What are the challenges or the threats you see here? Maybe if we do is what I call SWOT analysis.
Okay, I think the issue here is if we remove the politics of the West from it, is that once you go into any association, there are laws, free entry and free exit. So the question should be, what is the level of politics that the West will play to reduce the number of people that will join eventually? On the other hand, I think the commonality of interest is how to advance trade. Therefore, I don't really see any geopolitical clash among the countries that have decided to come into this alliance, in my view. They are strategic, even though there's element of politics or political undertone, but the larger economic interest will not make them have issues. And if you look at the trajectory so far, even at the point where South Africa joined in 2010, the level of advancement that has been made and the number of people showing interest to come into that bloc shows that the political interest will not really be a major issue. Even if American decide to sponsor and which most international these big countries do, but then it has come to stay. It's an international, intergovernmental organization with the sole aim of advancing trade. So I don't see in the nearest future that a new alliance will come that will forge some difficult scenarios within the membership. Rather, I suspect that by the next summit, again, maybe towards the end of the year, wherever that will take place, I don't have that offhand, but I think more people will join that union. And what I think will be a major challenge is the common currency they are trying to float, and how sustainable will it be in terms of how other countries can even use those. Then the role of the World Trade Organization is trying to see how they can use their instrument of trade facilitation to enhance the relationship among those countries.
Without another currency competing or running side by side the dollar, would it be possible to achieve the de-dollarization aim? And if that is not achieved, reducing the influence of the US and the West, would it become a possibility?
No, I think it's possible. I think, in my view, if you read the literatures in the public sphere and some research work, I think those countries are resolved to see how they can float another common currency that they can use to trade. And the more those countries are able to trade with themselves, with that...
But having a second currency, so to speak,
yeah,
aside the dollar, how would that impact the global financial system?
Of course, more people who are within those blocks will trade with those new financial instruments. Therefore, the dominance of dollar as a unit of exchange in the international trade will be weakened.
But doesn't that result to a kind of fragmentation in the financial system? So it means that when you want to trade with a certain block, you get to use one type of currency. When you want to trade with others, you use the dollar.
But I'm even worried that using one dominant currency to trade is not even good. We're in a multipolar system. Therefore, those currencies that we trade with internationally should not just be centralized because of American influence since the Second World War. So if we have, it's not fragmentation, rather it's going to reduce the dominance of certain countries, the way they shape trade policy. So once there's competition, then people will benefit. I'm sure that once that common currency comes into fruition, then it will help in terms of even the demand for the dollar, particularly Africa and Nigeria, where the demand for dollar is like, if you don't have dollar, you can't even survive in the next 24 hours. In my personal view, I think once this flotation come into being, then that would be good. And they already have a new development bank that's over billions of US dollar in terms of equivalent. And if you look at the major countries, they have, if you combine their GDP, they are over 28 trillion US dollars. So those are not kind of country that you can play with. If they really form that alliance and that currency come, then let the dollar go to sleep for some time, in my view.
Talking about the effort to de-dollarize, the economies of those nations, there is a report suggesting, in fact, Russia has stood up at since, to strengthen its own local currency since the war started, and is hoping that other nations also will follow that route. Now that it's a critical agenda for them, for these nations, how serious what kind of seriousness do you think African members of this bloc will put into this agenda, knowing fully well that most of the economies you have in Africa, they're import-driven? How sensitive will that be? And then how successful is it going to be? like Russia and some of the big nations in this bloc, there's a report suggesting that they've reached a dollar in most of their local trade to like about 95%. But looking at the African members, South Africa, Ethiopia, and the rest of them, who, when you look at the economies, they're import-driven. How successful is it going to be, this agenda, to de-dollarize the economies of these members?
When those countries subscribe to join, there's what the American say, what is in it for me. So therefore, there's something in it for them. And once they draw those kind of trade relationship with the specific countries, and this is the way we want to trade, this is a unit of exchange, this is the currency that we want to use, then it becomes automatically beneficial for those countries that are member. So in terms of flow of trade, it becomes easy because they already subscribe to a common unit of exchange among the member. So for Africa, and let's look at the countries in terms of ranking. South Africa is there, then after South Africa, Egypt, then Ethiopia. And if you look at the relationship that exists between South Africa and China and India, a greater majority of some of the business people in South Africa are actually of Indian origin. So they have a very good trade relationship. Then come to Egypt. Egypt is within the power indices, is equally a medium power, and they have what it takes to trade with these people, and it will benefit their citizens. So I don't have any doubt in my mind that this new relationship strategically will benefit the African countries that are playing there. And is an opportunity too for Russia in particular to do more business with Africa. And I think they are having their legs here already. But for China, the relationship, even in Ethiopia, most of the infrastructure that was developed in the last 30 years were done by China. Just the same way we're doing with our rail development, road network, hydropower. Even state governments are pushing India for those concession loans so that they can develop. So I think it's a welcome development for Africa. The West will now sit up and they will struggle as well to see how they can re-engineer or recalibrate the existing relationship in terms of trade with Africa.
So in the West struggling now to maintain position of dominance, do you foresee the fallout, or do you foresee that happening, that some other organizations, that these countries that are members of the BRIC bloc begin to either pull out of some other associations that they are part of with the West and the US?
I think there's alignment, realignment, and as I say, generally is that no permanent friend, no permanent enemy, but permanent interest. So I think that is what we play out in terms of geopolitical alliance, economic alliances. Wherever your interests are as a nation, that's where those countries will go. So constantly, there will be realignment within the international system, and I think there will be complete breakdown, even in spite of the mutual suspicion that exists between the big five. New alignments are coming. Once it's strategic to those countries, then I don't think there will be any problem. But even the global architecture even actually needs reworking the way it's presently constituted. So these new developments are welcome. We are becoming more multipolar rather than unipolar, where America and some of the big countries in the West begin to provide too much dominance for other smaller countries to breathe.
I'm thinking the move by this bloc to float a common currency, what impact will it have on the desire to have one currency in Africa as well? If that succeeds, what do you think might likely be the impact on the desire to have one currency in Africa? You know, efforts have been made. You have the issue of the visa-free policy. An effort is also being made to have a common currency for Africa. Now, for some members who are part of this bloc, who are African members, could that threaten the move also to have a unified currency in Africa?
No, I don't think so, because what we're speaking to here, you're talking about international relation, international trade. So the point here, when you create a common currency, you're just talking about how you can ease trade among member states. That does not stop other economic bloc to develop a currency that can stimulate trade among themselves. But the politics of the common currency in Africa leave much to be desired. Because the way Africa is constituted with this colonial configuration is a major challenge. Even within the sub-region, the ECOWAS, in the last how many years of it, about 43 years, going to 44 years of the Economic Community of West Africa, there's been a design for a common currency to enhance the protocol on free trade and movement. But as we speak, the various central banks, a small membership, have not been able to achieve that. But these big players, I'm sure because of the major benefits, we achieved that common currency even earlier than these other blocks. So, but there's a challenge for the African, but even the free trade agreement, continental free trade agreement, that came into force since 2021, shortly before the COVID, see a major challenge where you have a population that's almost at par with China and India. Then we're having problem in deploying the African Free Continental Free Trade Agreement to even trade among ourselves, and we'll be able to compete. We equally have that big population. If we put our house in order, we become a superpower as well in terms of how you play in the international arena.
All right, as a wrap up, let's look at the ability of the BRICS to actually break political influence, and in what way would that affect world peace? America has been fingered on some occasions as being behind some crises in some nations. But now that we have Russia, China, and some other countries coming together, what impact will it have on world peace?
All right, that bloc is already a geopolitical bloc. So there's a power currency in terms of how they deploy power in managing global peace. So that again will help to strengthen the relationship, particularly among those members. There are countries that the West, particularly America, suspect in terms of what they do, particularly Iran, now have a configuration with Russia. So the mutual suspicion will increase. But then it will equally help to balance the geopolitical alignment among those major players. But I think in terms of sustaining global peace and security, this new bloc will help to cushion that mutual suspicion, because some people belonging to blocs, so they will discuss certain things that are geopolitically relevant to them, while they're advancing their economic or trade interests. So I don't think there's anything wrong. Rather, the US, that is always mouthing democracy and the rule of law, more often than not, in my view, has always been a major problem, because sometimes they do what you call double standard and selective morality in international politics that has not helped the world in advancing global solidarity from the perspective of peace building and peace initiative.
So in a nutshell, what you're saying, this might create some form of balance?
I think so.
Okay. First of all, let's look at power and its relevance in production and in everyday living. So people have often talked about power being expensive, not necessarily being a challenge, but that it's available. But it seems to be a two-way traffic. It's expensive and it's also not very available. And the government says that it has been providing subsidy for power over a long time, even though that's debatable. And now it's saying it cannot continue sustaining that subsidy. What's your take on it in terms of, first of all, the availability of the power, and then secondly, the cost of the power?
Okay, the availability is a major problem from the perspective of the fact that the operators in that sector, disco, whatever, in that value chain, do not have access to the inputs to drive their processes. So the cost is high on the other hand. Number two, the operating environment is tough. Those who made investment in those sectors are not able to recoup their investment. And when those borrowings were initiated, the borrowings or the lending were two-digit lending figure. That again put up their operating costs. So when you make an investment, first and foremost, you have to stay in business even if you have not even made profit. I'm sure that many of those companies can't even break even. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the government did unbundle that sector, and the impression that was given, well, that was done during Jonathan's administration, was that they are now a profit-making venture and that they can provide energy to the greater majority of Nigeria, but that has not come into fruition. So this challenge is much, but I think the government is going to have a very difficult time managing his perception if, for example, the first subsidy, the issues have not even been resolved, the negative impact on the citizen. Then if IMF is advising and the government is complaining that they can no longer sustain subsidy in terms of what they were providing for electricity consumption that is not even available in the first instance, then what are you talking about manufacturing? We're not even talking about social consumption. That means you're going to drive most of the businesses underground. Then the savings that we're told that will be made from first subsidy, even though that the money is not somewhere in a basket, we have not seen the impact. So it's going to be a very difficult communication message that the government is going to pass to the citizens. It's going to really be difficult. Subsidies removed for fuel. You're talking about electricity subsidy. So the government cannot subsidize anything. Then the cost of this subsidy will be passed to the majority of the people. The employment figures are not looking very rosy. You have security challenge. Even though part of security, terrorism is there, you have all banditry, kidnapping, and all these overlapping drivers of conflict. To what extent can this advisory from IMF be sustainable? I think I'm just looking at how the government can manage the public perception. It's going to really be very difficult to pass that message. Now they have to find a way to subsidize that. If the money that is coming from the saving from the first subsidy is translated into electricity, I think that would be a welcome development, rather than unsustainable social intervention that they give, what they normally call palliatives.
Let's put the statistics here. Maybe that will help you to understand why the federal government is saying this is not sustainable. You have already, still some bills to be paid by the federal government to the tune of 1.3 trillion. And then you have electricity subsidy, which has increased to 3.3 trillion now. But if you look at the provision in the budget, according to the minister, now that's why it's concerned, it's about 450 billion naira. And now you're having a projection of 3.3 trillion naira for the year. Looking at these factors, do you think it's something sustainable on the part of the government? You are dealing with debt on the other hand, you're dealing with shortage of funds, knowing fully well also that Nigerians are still not recovering or are recovering from the effect of the removal of fuel subsidy. How sustainable it is, in the face of the realities of revenue that are decreasing here and there, how sustainable it is. Isn't that enough for the federal government to take up this decision and say, oh, we need to jettison this idea of electricity subsidy? And if that happens, what will be the impact of that on Nigeria?
I'm always worried when they brandish figures from the public service. Who consumed the 450 billion electricity in the first place? Why were they carrying those consumptions over a period of time? We need to interrogate that first and foremost. Two, if the government feel that paying those tariffs are not sustainable, what kind of investment option is the government making in that sector over a period of years so that you have a program to remove the subsidy? That's another narrative that we must sustain. So what do you want to put in place? I don't want to pay subsidies for electricity. What can I do as a government for the next 3 years? Because this government is almost spending 1 year, and in another 2 years we'll be talking about politics of 2027. So what is a roadmap? You want to remove subsidy by the year 2025, first quarter. This is what I'm paying as subsidy. This is the kind of investment I want to make as a government in this sector, so that when I remove subsidy first quarter of 2025, then the citizen can absorb the shocks, because they have not even come to terms with the fuel subsidy. And they see this debate that this so-called fuel subsidy, there's nothing wrong with it, but how the operation was done, and that the government should open up that space and let's do some very thorough investigation of what went somewhere and what was actually the subsidy. So I don't subscribe, and it's going to have industrial relation issues with the labor movement. If, for example, you're even talking about minimum wage, that's not even sustainable in the first place. The 30,000 minimum wage cannot even take you in terms of transportation. So if you now remove subsidy, they are passing the buck to the citizens. And the primary purpose of government is to provide security and welfare. So this conversation may not be mere conversation that the IMF came here, that for you to sustain your financials, you should remove subsidy from electricity. What are the solutions before you remove the subsidy? So those advisories, to a very large extent, are important, but the welfare of the citizens should be uppermost in the mind of the government. That's my personal submission.
All right, let's even look at the operations of the distribution companies, the DISCOs. Now, the problem of metering has always been there, and there's been the clamor several times, even by civil society organizations, for the provision of meters instead of estimated billings. Now, if meters are provided, do you think it would be easy for the DISCOs themselves to measure what is the quantity of electricity supply, and it would be easy for them to get their payment? Because meters, with the prepaid meters, you have to pay for the service before you get it. Because the sector is struggling with liquidity issue. Would that help it and even reduce this frequent call for increase in tariff?
I think in terms of operation, I think they are struggling. It's very expensive to provide energy. And I don't think that those tariffs, if you really look at it across the continent, even in Africa, I think the tariffs are still relatively low, not making case for the disco. But what is critical that those businesses must do, that they must provide metering for their consuming public. Metering is very critical to what we call revenue assurance. Once you do those metering, and most of them are prepaid, then your cash flow, you can have a sustainable cash flow that you can trust, because those monies come in. Where there's a sabotage with the operatives, they come and give you what we call estimated billing. That's just to corrupt the system. So the management of those disco must make it mandatory and even go further to even get some facility from the bank for metering purpose. And they can do their financials to justify that if we meter SYZ, this is the number of consumers we have. If they pay an average consumption rate of XYZ, this is the financial projection that we have, and we're able to get more money for the operation, and you can recoup the lending money that you have given to the operation. But then, the government has this very serious responsibility to create an avenue for discos, for those who are in production, so that they can sustain that environment. Then when the metering is done, then those countries, disco in particular, can have revenue assurance in terms of their money coming, rather than these corrupt and sharp practices in the industry where people give you estimated billing for electricity you don't consume. So where you have a prepaid option, if you are not there and the light doesn't come in 1 week, then it zeroes out. When the electricity comes, the billing starts. So the company themselves must be disciplined to find a way to remove those people who don't desire change in those management.
Talking about sharp practices, don't you think it's of necessity to actually investigate if electricity is actually being subsidized in Nigeria? Taking a reference or example or lessons from what happened with fuel subsidy, where it was found out that some group of persons were actually being subsidized rather than the larger population. Rather than removing the subsidy, don't you think there's a need to do a proper investigation to even find out what subsidy or who is involved, who is actually being subsidized? Like some people criticized, are you saying the federal government is subsidizing for darkness?
That is not an entering point to this discussion. The point here is that we have a regulatory agency, the Electricity Regulatory Commission. They are the ones that can tell us whether the government is subsidizing electricity. But if you see it from the initial investment that were made when the disco came into being, the government still provided some money for them to operate. Maybe those monies are considered as subsidy, I don't know. I don't have adequate information, so I cannot really speak in specific terms. First, but you have an agency, so the agency will let us know who the subsidy, which companies are collecting those subsidies for the provision of electricity. I know the government has another one, they call Nigerian Bulk Purchase Commission, has an interface with this disco. But I don't have sufficient information, so I can't speak to that specifically. But the point is, these businesses are private business. Encouragement should be made for more players to come in. Then whatever stake the government have in those businesses, they should find a way to de-invest from those businesses so that we see them as a private entity, not devoid of regulation, so that they can get more investment and make more profit. So if the electricity is available, I'm sure people will be willing to pay for it, even in spite of the relatively high tariff that we currently are contesting in this regard. So the government has a role, the existing disco, then the consumer, that's the consuming public, should find a way to go to the Consumer Protection Council that has the responsibility to check the impact the services have on consumers. Then we may have the true picture from the perspective, whether the government is subsidizing darkness. I don't know.
All right, let's take it from the point of the argument of the discourse that they want a charge that is cost reflective. On the end of the consumer wants services that is charge reflective. So how can a balance be created? Because eventually we might see an increase in electricity tariff. Now, if government succeeds in removing subsidy, whether civil society organizations engage them in some talks, there are protests or not, at the end of the day, if subsidy is removed, what that would mean is that we'll find an increase in electricity tariff. So what is the way to ensure that the cost reflective charge, in quotes, is equal to a charge reflective service?
I think we already...
service reflective charge.
Yeah, we spoke to that in this conversation. Essentially, if you want to get your revenue, then you must improve on your operational efficiency. Your operational efficiency here means mentoring your consumer.
But they've been struggling with that.
Yeah, no, what I'm trying to say that if that tariff comes to stay, if you don't do the right thing, they are going to have a challenge in terms of your ability to provide electricity, your ability to justify your tariff vis-a-vis the provision of service. So if there's a disconnect in that chain of, then there's going to be a problem. So the point I'm saying is that for them, if the government remove the tariff to sustain their business, they must find a way to provide adequate modern metering so that it can justify the prepayment regime that will help you to sustain your revenue.
Should it be a condition imposed on them, on the discourse, that before you increase tariff, meters must be provided to every consumer?
I think that's a wise decision for any business person to do. So as a business, if they want to sustain that business, then metering is an essential component of their service offering. So if that component of that service offering is not there, there will be a service failure that will impact negatively on their operation.
All right. If the federal government is going to remove electricity subsidy, what are some of the lessons we can deduce from what happened with the removal of fuel subsidy here, and that can help the federal government plan better or strategize better when the need to remove electricity subsidy arises? Do you expect that kind of approach that was deployed to that of fuel subsidy, where when the president was sworn in, he announced that subsidy is gone? What is your take on how systemic this can be done so that it won't have a ripple effect on Nigerians, businesses, and at a crucial time like this? Do you consider it necessary?
First, I think there's a mutual distrust between the public and the government. So the first thing to do is the government has to be strategic in terms of providing communication to citizens. Number two, in my view, there should be a roadmap to phasing out the electricity subsidy. But the politics of it, like what happened to the fuel subsidy for a long time, should be open to the public. These are the numbers. These are the agencies. These are what we've been paying. This is when we intend to remove it. Even if the subsidy, you put a unit price into it, you can equally graduate the process of removing it so that the impact is not felt in the same way the fuel subsidy has. And is not appropriate at this particular point in time, because you are dealing with one major issue of the first subsidy that you have not been able to resolve. So what I will advise those who are in the corridors of power is to provide the roadmap, a strategic communication flow, telling the public these are the issues and this is what we want to do with the roadmap. They must be strategic, the information must be provided, and those milestones must be seen by the public. If not, that same policy will be seen from the same perspective of that mistrust between the public and the government. What I think, it is not the right time, because if you look at the cost of living, which is a major challenge, the government is releasing grains, I don't know, for almost 2 weeks now. I don't see where those grains are for now. So let's see how we can find a way to put a document in the public. This IMF releasing news release and all that, to a very large extent, equally threatens the government. IMF should not have the responsibility to communicate to the Nigerian public when they come to have discussions with those in government. It should be the responsibility of the government to say, we had a meeting with IMF, our numbers are not looking very good in this direction. These are the advisory. As a government, this is what we want to do going forward. So once you put those things in the public space, people are jittery, you have a problem you are managing, you are not able to resolve, you are adding another one. I don't think that is good for nation building.
Even looking at some of the IMF recommendations, what's your take on it? The government of Nigeria seems to be going along the lines of recommendations of the IMF. Do you think caution is required at some level?
I think so. I think some of the information that is provided by these Bretton Woods institutions, in some respects, are advisory. But then the government, when they provide those advisory, the government needs to look at its numbers again. Where are the leakages even within the public sector, and see how they can block those leakages, rather than having outright report that the IMF say we can no longer sustain electricity subsidy, therefore we are going to remove the subsidy. Okay, so the government must look at those reports with deeper insight beyond those I always argue that there are a lot of international conspiracy from the West. So a government that does not look at things deeply may always fall into this trap of these multilateral institutions that have become the best advisors. We must not always look to the West. They equally have their challenges. We should have local solution to our problem. And we must be strategic in the way we think and the way we communicate to the public.
Now, going along that line before we go on a quick break, using the local data, we have the National Bureau of Statistics that provides statistics on different aspects of the economy. Should the government be working more closely with data from the NBS in providing solutions or in dealing with the challenges of the Nigerian economy?
Yeah, the data are there. Another question you must take, Blessing, is that who sponsors this data?
But the NBS is supposed to be independent.
No, it's a government agency. But if you go and look at their mandate and the kind of multilateral corporations that come from some of these development partners, in quote, you see the hand of some of these people in some of those things they do. So the figures are there as benchmark, but then in international development, the language and the conversation now is that evidence-based data. So to what extent are these data that you aggregate from the Fed justifiable? Do you stimulate data just for the fun of creating data? Those are the conversation that we must do. So there should be other data. You have research data independent of the government. So what are the indices? What are your research data? Are they valid? Are they reliable? So once you're able to determine that, then be able to have a way forward in that regard. But the government must not often depend on these Bretton Woods institutions to make decisions that affect their citizens.